I didn't mean to see his phone. It was one of those long, quiet afternoons where the house feels like it's holding its breath. My mom was outside pulling weeds from the front garden. I was inside, barefoot in the kitchen, trying to find something decent in the fridge that hadn't expired. And his phone was there, charging on the counter. Rick always kept it glued to his side. At dinners, barbecues, even during those fake family movie nights where he stared at the screen more than the television, the man didn't even let it out of his sight in the bathroom. But that day, he forgot. Just left it buzzing there while he stepped out to take a call on the patio. Irony, right? It lit up once, then again, and again. And that's when my stomach dropped. The name was just C. No emoji, no last name, just a letter. But the preview said everything. Can't wait to feel your hands again. She still doesn't know? LOL. But before I move on, they say if you've ever been betrayed by family, hitting like brings peace, subscribing brings clarity, and commenting brings karma to those who wronged you. Try it, and tell me where you're watching from. Anyways, I blinked, froze. My hand on a bottle of iced tea, suddenly feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. It lit up again. I swear, if I hear her voice on speaker one more time, I'm gonna scream. I don't know how you stand her. I didn't even realize I'd picked it up. My thumb moved like it didn't belong to me. No password. Idiot. And just like that, I was inside. There were dozens of messages, photos, videos, voice notes, dates going back years, not weeks, not months, years. There she was, the CA younger woman. Blonde, sharp cheekbones, pouty lips. She looked like she stepped out of one of those boutique yoga studios Rick always scoffed at on the drive home. And she hated my mom. Do you really have to do dinner with her tonight? Poor thing still thinks you're loyal. That's almost sweet. She's clueless. You're wasted in that house. You're just staying until the life insurance clears, right? I felt something twist inside me. Not just anger, not just disgust, shame. Like I was intruding on something I wasn't supposed to see, even though it wasn't me who did anything wrong. My mom had been married to him for 9 years. She called him her second chance. She used to say, "Not all men are like your father, Lena. Some really do grow up." She said it with that tired kind of hope. The kind that comes after you've been hurt, but you're still trying to believe the world owes you a little bit of kindness. And this man, this smug, khaki-wearing, budget wine-loving real estate broker, had been cheating on her for at least 4 years. While she cooked his meals, folded his laundry, tried to bond with his bratty teenage daughter on weekends. And what was he doing in return? Sending heart emojis and voice notes to a woman named C about how boring she was. I didn't cry. Not then. I felt cold. Like something inside me had been yanked out and replaced with steel. I heard the back door open. Rick's voice said, "Hey, Lena. Your mom said she needs help with the mulch." I set the phone down slowly, exactly how I'd found it. I said, "Sure. I'll be right out." He walked past me like nothing happened. Like his whole double life hadn't just cracked open under the kitchen lights. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the messages in my head. Not just the cheating, the cruelty, the way they joked about my mom's voice, her cooking, her body, as if she were some clueless pet. I thought of the times I saw her sneak on makeup before he got home, the way she'd light candles at dinner and play those Spotify jazz playlists that he always rolled his eyes at. She tried, and he was mocking her the entire time. I stared at my bedroom ceiling for hours, fingers clenched in my blanket. Part of me said, stay out of it. Let her figure it out on her own. Another part of me whispered, if you don't tell her, you're letting him win. The next day, he was gone for a client meeting. His phone wasn't in sight, but I'd already sent every screenshot to my email the night before. I didn't even know what I'd do with them yet. I just needed proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That I didn't imagine this. That it was real. Because I knew exactly how this would go down. Rick would deny everything, spin it, blame me. My mom would cry, fall apart, maybe even forgive him. That's what terrified me the most. What if she looked at all that evidence and still stayed? At breakfast, she poured herself coffee. She was humming, and it made my throat ache. I said, "Mom?" She turned, smiled, and said, I said, "We need to talk." She blinked. I said, "It's about Rick." Her smile faltered. I opened my phone. My thumb hovered over the email, but I didn't hit play. Not yet. I said, "I found something." On his phone. "He's cheating on you, and it's not new. It's been going on for a long time." She stared at me, eyes wide, silent. I said, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to find it, but I did, and I couldn't pretend I didn't." She said, "Lena, no. That's not, he wouldn't." I said, "I have the screenshots." Her voice cracked. She said, "Stop. Just stop." I pulled up the photos, held them toward her. She didn't take the phone. She just shook her head like I'd handed her a bomb. I said, "I wish it weren't true." But it is. Still, she didn't move. Then she whispered, "Show me." And I did. She read every message in silence. Her face changed, minute by minute. At first, disbelief. Then rage. Then something that looked like grief. She handed me the phone back like it was burning her. She said, "I need a minute." And she walked out the door without another word. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the place where Rick's phone had charged the day before. And I thought, this is how families burn down. One screen, one secret. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this. If he was going to lie, I was going to make sure I had the truth. And now, I had it. I had proof. I had motive. I had fire. He was going to wish he never left that phone unlocked. She sat there for a long time, staring at the screen like it was some kind of curse. The photos, the messages, the videos. She didn't cry, not at first. "Lena," my mother said, "this can't be real." Her voice was flat, like someone trying to wake up from a nightmare before it pulls them under. Her hands were trembling, just slightly, around the rim of her coffee mug. "It's real," I said. She blinked at me. "Number, you don't understand him. Rick. He would never talk like that. Not about me. Not like that." I whispered. "But he did." She opened another message. The one where the woman joked about her voice sounding like an old blender. My mom inhaled sharply and closed her eyes. Then her hand flew to her mouth. "I didn't want to believe it either," I said, "but you deserve to know." She didn't answer. "I didn't go looking for it," I said. "His phone lit up. I saw the messages. It just happened." "I need a moment," she said. "Okay," I whispered. She stood up, knocking the chair back. Her shoulders rose and fell in sharp movements. She was breathing fast. She turned and walked straight to her bedroom. I didn't follow her. Instead, I sat in silence, listening to the clock tick, listening to the soft rumble of the dryer in the hallway, listening to the way the world stayed quiet even when something inside your house was exploding. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then the front door opened. Rick walked in, keys jangling, voice chipper. "Hey," Rick said. "Smells like someone made coffee." He didn't see me sitting in the corner of the living room. He didn't notice the silence at first. He was too busy putting his bag down. Then he called out, "Laura? You home?" He turned and saw me. Rick asked, "Lena? What's with the face?" I didn't move. I just looked at him, and then behind me I heard my mother's footsteps. She came down the hallway slowly, eyes red, mascara smudged like bruises beneath them. Rick tilted his head. Rick said, "Babe?" "What's going on?" My mother held up her phone. Rick's face twitched. She didn't yell. She didn't even raise her voice. She said, "Who is she?" Rick blinked. My mother repeated, "Who is the woman in these messages, Rick?" Rick tried a soft chuckle. "Okay, what is this? Did Lena show you something weird?" I stood up. I said, "Don't you dare try to spin this." Rick looked at me, then back at my mother. Rick said, "Laura, come on. You know how Lena is. She's always been sensitive, always twisting things." My mother asked, "Is this twisting?" She opened a voice note. We all stood in silence while the audio played, a woman giggling and saying, "Did you fake a headache again to get out of bed with your housemaid?" My mother flinched. Rick's tone changed instantly. Rick said, "All right, that's enough." "You went through my phone? Seriously, Lena? You violated my privacy?" I said, "I saw the messages by accident. Then I saw everything else, and I sent them to myself, in case you tried to lie." Rick took a step toward me. Rick snapped, "You think you're some kind of hero here? You think breaking apart this family is going to help anything?" My mother whispered, "She didn't break it. You did." Rick raised his voice. "You're letting her manipulate you. She's never liked me. She's always looked for reasons to tear me down." I said, "I didn't have to look." "You left the proof right there." Rick pointed at me. "You always wanted your mom to yourself. You hated that she remarried. You're punishing her for moving on." "I'm protecting her," I said. Rick turned to my mother. "And you believe this? After everything we've built?" She looked up at him. My mother said, "What did we build, Rick? A lie?" His jaw clenched, then he did the one thing I didn't expect. He smirked. Rick said, "You think you're going to find someone better? Good luck. You think anyone else is going to put up with your routines, your expectations?" He turned to me. Rick said, "And you? You think she's going to thank you for this in 6 months, when she's broke and alone and bitter again?" My mother's voice cracked. My mother said, "You need to leave." Rick laughed. Rick said, "You want me to leave the house I helped pay for?" "You need to leave," she repeated. He stared at her, then looked at me. Rick said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I crossed my arms. I said, "Maybe, but at least I can sleep tonight." Rick walked past me, into the bedroom. I heard drawers open, then close, bags being unzipped. He packed quickly, like someone used to running. 20 minutes later, he was at the front door with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Rick said, "You'll regret this, Lena." I met his eyes. I said, "No, you will." He looked at my mother. For a second, I thought he'd say something. Apologize, plead, but he didn't. He opened the door, he walked out. And just like that, he was gone. My mother stood frozen in the kitchen, hands shaking against the counter. She whispered, "I can't believe this is real." I walked over and placed my hand on hers. I said, "You don't have to go through this alone." She didn't say anything, but she squeezed my hand back. Then she sat down on the floor, back against the cabinet, and began to sob. Long, aching, guttural sobs. I slid down beside her. We stayed there like that for a long time. The house was quiet again. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet that follows a storm. When everything's broken and scattered and you don't even know where to begin. But at least now, we could start. We had nowhere to go but forward. And Rick? Rick had just declared himself my enemy. He had no idea what that would mean. Not yet. But he would. It started small. So small I almost missed it. The first time I noticed something was off, it was my Aunt Trish. Normally, she texted me back within minutes. We used to send each other dumb memes and family gossip, especially since she never really liked Rick. But that week, silence. I sent her a message saying, "Hey, just checking in, Mom's having a rough time." No reply. A few days later, I saw she posted a photo with Rick at some charity golf event. Her caption read, "So proud of the men who stay strong even when they're unfairly blamed." I read it 3 times. The words didn't even make sense, unless you knew the story he was spinning. I called her. It went straight to voicemail. That's when the unease started crawling up my spine. Next came my younger half-brother, Kyle. He and I weren't close, not really, but we'd been texting more ever since Rick moved out. The night it happened, Kyle had actually messaged me, "What's going on?" Mom won't say anything. I told him the truth, carefully. I didn't dump everything. I just said Rick had been unfaithful, and Mom asked him to leave. He replied, "Damn, that sucks. You okay?" I said I was. But the next day, nothing. The day after that, still nothing. By the end of the week, I saw he'd unfollowed me on Instagram. I texted him, "Kyle?" No answer. Then the rest of them followed. Family friends who used to ask how I was doing started liking Rick's updates. One of his posts read, "Sometimes people betray you when you least expect it. Stay strong." Betray him? He was the one who cheated. He was the one who mocked my mother, who lied, who sneered when she cried. But somehow, I was the villain. At my cousin Amanda's wedding 2 weeks later, I wore a simple blue dress and smiled politely through the ceremony. I tried to keep my head up, to feel normal. Until the photographer started lining people up for family photos. My name wasn't called. "Amanda?" I asked. "Did you want me in this one?" She turned to me and said, "Maybe let's just do immediate family for now." I said, "You had me in everyone when I helped you move last fall." She looked embarrassed. Amanda said, "It's just a sensitive time. With your mom and Rick, people are talking." "About what?" I asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't ask me back in either. I stood off to the side, heels sinking into the grass, watching them pose like nothing was wrong. That night, I sat in my car and stared at the dashboard until the parking lot emptied. Something inside me cracked a little. Not just because of what they were doing, but because they believed him. They believed Rick. Somehow, the man who destroyed my mother's trust had twisted the story into his own redemption arc. He told them I had snooped, that I had manipulated the evidence, that I was always jealous of how close he and my mom were, that I wanted to break them up. He told them I was dramatic, unstable, vindictive. He didn't say a single lie outright. No, he just did what men like him always do. He implied. He left just enough blanks for people to fill in the rest with their own doubts. The worst part? Even my mother started to pull away. At first, she cried every day. She walked around the house in a daze, not eating, not speaking much. I tried to be there. I brought her tea. Cleaned up when she forgot. Cooked when she didn't have the energy. But after the second week, she began texting again. Sometimes I saw her smiling at her phone, and one night, I walked past the living room and heard her whispering, I know, it's just so hard." I asked her, "Was that Rick?" She looked at me like a child caught with candy in her pocket. My mother said, "He just wanted to talk, to explain." "Explain what?" I asked. She sat down. She said, "That he never meant to hurt anyone, that you misunderstood." I shook my head. I said, "Mom, I showed you the messages. I showed you what he said. About you." Her voice trembled. "He said you edited those." I blinked. Edited? She whispered. He said you were always good with apps, that you resented him, that you wanted it to be true. I stood there frozen. I said, so now I'm the liar? My mother looked down. She didn't answer. I said, do you really think I would do that? To you? She whispered, I don't know what to think anymore. I nodded, slowly. I said, okay. And I walked away. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't beg her to believe me. I had already done all the right things. I had told the truth. But in this house, truth wasn't enough. Image mattered more. Appearances, control. And Rick still had all three. That weekend, I stayed with a friend. I needed space. I needed air. Then, late Sunday night, I opened my phone while waiting in line at the grocery store. And there it was, a photo, posted by my mother. She was at a restaurant, smiling, sitting next to Rick. Her hand was resting on his arm. There was wine. Candles. Her caption said, trying to rebuild. Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what matters most. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. And I realized something. I was out. They had cut me loose. Not with words, not with any big announcement. Just one cold, slow push away from the circle. One whispered lie at a time. But they'd done it. They believed the man who lied. They doubted the daughter who told the truth. And if that's what it took to keep their peace, fine. Let them keep it. Let them keep their silence. Because I was done knocking on locked doors. And if Rick thought he'd buried me, he hadn't seen what I could do when I had nothing left to lose. I left everything behind the following month. I packed my life into 3 boxes, 2 suitcases, and 1 listless goodbye. There was no dramatic farewell, no confrontation, no closure. Just silence. My mother didn't ask me to stay. My half-brother didn't send a text. Aunt Trish never returned my calls. It was as if I had simply evaporated from the family tree, like I'd always been a defective branch they could prune and forget. So I left. I moved to a city where no one knew me. I took the cheapest room I could find, a walk-up with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who shouted through the walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone else's shame. I worked odd jobs at first, waitressing, copy editing, temping. I cleaned other people's offices and answered phones like I had something to prove. Because in my head, I did. They had cast me out, so I would make something so solid, so undeniable, they couldn't pretend I didn't exist. I applied for an internship at a small local paper, not because it paid well, it didn't, but because I had stories. And I wanted to tell them. They handed me fluff assignments in the beginning. Farmers market write-ups, pet adoption days. But I wrote every word like it mattered. I showed up early, stayed late, I triple-checked every fact, every quote. And slowly, something happened. They started handing me real work, a housing scam that stole from seniors, a political fundraiser funneling money to private accounts, a gym that locked people into illegal contracts. I hunted the truth like it was my only lifeline, because, in a way, it was. I became known for it. Not famous, not glamorous, just respected. The girl, they said, was dramatic and unstable. She was now the one uncovering fraud, asking hard questions, forcing apologies out of people who had never been told no in their lives. I never used Rick's name in any of my stories, but every time I hit publish on an expose, I thought of him, of his smug smile, of his lies, of the way he turned people I loved into shadows of themselves. I kept going. Years passed. I got a full-time job at the paper. My byline became a regular feature. People began to ask for me by name. I lived in a different city, with different weather, different streets, and a different version of myself. One who didn't answer to whispers, one who didn't flinch at rejection, one who built herself from rejection. And still, not a word from my mother, not even on birthdays. I didn't call either. I didn't send holiday cards. I didn't pretend to be okay with what they chose to believe. It hurt, some days more than others. But it also hardened me. And that hardness made space for something new. Pride. I wasn't proud of being abandoned. I was proud of what I did after. One morning, I woke up to rain tapping against the window. I had an interview lined up for a story on unethical real estate zoning, something that would have made Rick sweat. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and there it was. A message. From an unknown number. Just 2 words. It's Rick. I stared at the screen. For a moment, my whole body went still. I hadn't heard that name in over 3 years. Not in real time anyway, only in memory, only in fury. I didn't reply. Instead, I reread it. Over and over and over. It wasn't the kind of message someone sends after all that time unless they want something. I closed my laptop. I went to work like nothing had happened. But all day the thought clung to me like static. What did he want? Why now? Did my name finally cross his feed? Did someone show him the article I'd written that went viral last month? Had he finally run out of people to manipulate? That night, I reopened the message, and I typed. I said, "What do you want?" His response came 5 minutes later. Too fast. "I read your article, the one about the hospital billing fraud. You've really made a name for yourself." I didn't answer. 5 more minutes passed. "I just wanted to say, I was wrong about you." I laughed, out loud. I actually laughed. Because now he wanted to say it. After ruining my family, after turning people against me, after making me the villain in a story he created. Now he wanted to take it back. I didn't reply, not that night, not the next day. I kept the messages, but I didn't need them. Because I wasn't that girl anymore. The one who needed someone else to tell her she mattered. I had already written my truth in headlines. And this time, no one could edit it out. He asked to meet in public. Of course he did. People like Rick always prefer polished surfaces, curated angles, controlled environments. He chose a trendy cafe downtown, the kind with marble tables and soft jazz playing through invisible speakers. He booked a window seat. When I arrived, he stood up like we were old friends. Rick said, "Lena, you look incredible." I sat down. I didn't thank him. Rick laughed softly and added, "It's been too long." I said, "Cut to the part where you tell me why I'm here." He leaned back, exhaled. Rick said, "I'm in a situation. And I'm hoping, maybe, you'll hear me out." I didn't blink. Rick continued, "You probably saw the news." I had. Everyone had. The headlines were everywhere. Local business mogul under investigation for securities fraud. Whistleblower alleges decade-long scheme. Anonymous source says CEO used shell companies to hide revenue. Rick, my mother's perfect man, the family's golden stepfather. And now, just another headline. I said, "I saw." He looked at me carefully, like someone trying to decide which mask to wear. Rick said, "A lot of it's exaggerated." You know how media works. I raised an eyebrow. He backtracked. Rick said, "But okay." Some of it's true. It's complicated. Business always is. I waited. Rick said, "The problem is, the press is twisting it into something it's not, and people are turning their backs. Investors, clients, even friends." He leaned in. Rick said, "But you understand this world now. You know how stories get shaped. You know how to frame things." I stayed quiet. Rick continued, I thought maybe you could speak to someone. Help me tell my side, not as a favor, just as someone who knows the truth about how unfair things can be. I smiled. He didn't notice the kind of smile it was. I said, "You want me to save your reputation?" He said, "No. I want you to help me tell the truth." I said, "You mean your truth?" He tapped his fingers on the table. Rick said, "I'm asking for perspective. For balance." I said, "You mean spin." His face twitched. Rick said, "Lena, this could ruin me." I tilted my head. I said, "And you think I care?" He went quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. Rick said, "I know I hurt you. I know what I did back then, with your mom, with the family. I handled things poorly." I let him speak. Rick added, "I was under pressure. You were always emotional. You had a way of twisting things." There it was, still blaming me. I asked, "So you think I twisted the evidence of your affair?" Rick didn't answer. I said, "You called me a liar. You turned my family against me. My own mother wouldn't look at me for years. And now you want my help?" He reached across the table. Rick said, "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to ask, like a man, like a father." I flinched. I said, "You're not my father." He withdrew his hand. Rick said, "You're right. I just thought you'd want to do the right thing." I laughed, short, cold. I said, "You think this is about right and wrong? This is about consequences, something you've managed to dodge your whole life." He didn't respond. I leaned forward. I said, "You buried the truth once. You turned everyone against me to protect your image. You stole my family, my trust, my name. You left me with nothing." He lowered his eyes. Rick said, "I was scared." I said, "So was I." Silence. I stood up. Rick asked, "Will you think about it?" I looked him in the eye. I said, "I'll think about it." But I already knew my answer. He watched me walk away, still clinging to the hope that I might save him. But here's what Rick never understood. I wasn't here to rescue anyone. I was here to remember the look on his face, the exact moment he realized the tables had turned. And I wasn't the one begging anymore. I didn't write it out of rage. I wrote it because I finally had the words, because after everything he'd taken from me, the trust, the truth, the warmth of a home that used to be mine, I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted the record set straight. I opened a blank document and wrote what I remembered. Not just the affair, not just the lies, but the silence, the manipulation, the way Rick rewrote the script and cast me as the villain. I didn't use his name. I didn't have to. The piece was titled, "When Telling the Truth Makes You the Enemy." I started with what happened the day I saw his phone. The screenshots, the texts, the nickname he gave the other woman, the way she mocked my mother, the way he laughed at her pain. Then I wrote about what came after, how I told the truth and watched everyone choose the lie, how I was erased from family photos, cut out of holidays, unfollowed, uninvited, how I became a ghost in the very house I used to call home. And then I wrote about what I did with that silence. I wrote about the city I moved to, the people who didn't know me as a scandal or a whisper, the work I took, the stories I chased, the identity I built on nothing but my own spine. I ended the piece with one line. I was never unstable. I was just inconvenient. I didn't pitch it to anyone. I posted it on my own terms. A public blog post. No fanfare, just the truth. And then everything cracked open. Within 24 hours, the article had been shared over 100,000 times. By the end of the week, it had 1 million views. I received emails, hundreds, from women, from daughters, from people who had been silenced, gaslit, shamed for telling the truth. Strangers wrote things like, "I thought I was crazy until I read this. I lived this. Thank you for saying it. You just gave me the courage to speak up." Some signed with their names, others were anonymous, but they all echoed one thing. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and even then, it can still move mountains. Then the reporters came. They didn't know the name in the story, but they knew how to follow a trail. Rick's scandal was already under investigation, but my essay gave them something new: character. One journalist reached out. She said, "Would you go on record?" I said, "Not yet, but you can quote me." She did. The article dropped 3 days later. The headline read, "Inside the Hidden Life of a CEO Under Fire, Exposé Adds Fuel to the Blaze." They quoted one line from my piece in bold. "I was never unstable. I was just inconvenient." That's when the tide turned. People who had once distanced themselves started asking questions. Aunt Trish emailed me. She wrote, "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I believed what I wanted to believe. But now I see it." Even Amanda, the cousin who pushed me out of the wedding photo, messaged me. She wrote, "You were brave." I wasn't. I see that now. I read each message with steady hands, not because I didn't care, but because I had already mourned their absence. Anything now was just wind after the storm. Then came the most unexpected one. My mother. She didn't write, she called. And when I didn't pick up, she left a voicemail. Her voice was shaky. She said, "Lena, I saw what you wrote. I read it 4 times. I didn't know you felt all that. I didn't want to know, maybe. But I know now. I think I made a mistake. A lot of them." There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." And she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, not crying, not shaking, just quiet. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was the first time in years she'd said anything close to the word sorry. And it was the first time she didn't defend him. Rick, meanwhile? He vanished from the media cycle like a stone dropped in mud. The company placed him on indefinite leave. His name stopped appearing in press releases. The golf charity photos were taken down. His social media went dark. People stopped asking about him. They started asking about me. They asked about the woman who told the story, the one who'd been branded difficult, dramatic, untrustworthy, until she turned those scars into something the world couldn't ignore. I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. For the first time in years, the weight was gone. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had spoken. And this time, people listened. And Rick? He finally had to sit in silence and hear the one thing he spent years avoiding. The truth. Spoken by the one person he thought he could silence forever. I never returned the call, not right away, at least. The voicemail stayed in my phone for weeks, untouched, unplayed again. I didn't need to hear it twice. Every word was etched into my mind. Her pauses, the ache in her voice, the regret folded between every syllable. "I think I made a mistake," my mother had said. She was right. She had. But some mistakes cost more than others. Some can't be cleaned up with an apology. Some leave stains that soak through holidays, birthdays, and entire years of silence. And yet, I didn't hate her. That surprised me more than anything. Because for a long time, I did. Or maybe I thought I had to. Hating her made the pain sharper, easier to carry, simpler to explain to myself why I had walked away, why I didn't go back. But now that the world finally knew the truth, I didn't need the hate anymore. I didn't need the anger to stand upright. I had my own spine. A few days after the voicemail, I found myself walking through the park near my apartment. The air was cool. Autumn was coming in slow and golden. And I realized something. I had survived every single thing Rick tried to bury me with. He had lied. He had manipulated. He had convinced the people I loved that I was broken. He tried to ruin me. But I was still here. And I wasn't just breathing, I was living. There was a small bakery on the corner that always smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar. I walked in. The woman behind the counter smiled and said, "You're Lena, right? From the article?" I nodded. She said, "What you wrote, it helped me. My sister's going through something like that. I sent her your piece. She called me crying. It gave her the courage to leave." I smiled. She handed me a cookie. "On the house," she said. "Thank you." It hit me, walking back, what power really looked like. It wasn't about being feared. It wasn't about crushing someone like Rick. It was about walking freely, without lies, without shame. It was about building a life so full of truth that it didn't matter who tried to erase you. You would still be seen. I opened my front door, set the cookie down, and stared at my phone. The voicemail was still there. I tapped delete, not to forget, but because I no longer needed proof that I had been right. I had something better than proof. I had peace. I didn't call my mother back, but I did write her a letter. Not to reopen the door, but to leave it unlocked. Should she ever be brave enough to walk through it truthfully? I told her, "You believed him when it was easy. I don't need you to believe me now that it's hard. I just need you to be honest. If you can do that, I'll meet you there." I didn't send it right away, but I kept it. Because writing it reminded me. I wasn't the girl with screenshots anymore. I wasn't the one banging on a locked door. I had built a different door. A better one. Rick never contacted me again. I think he knew better. His name faded from the headlines. His photo disappeared from corporate websites. He became what he always feared most, irrelevant. But me? My name was still on articles, on op-eds, on invitations to panels and speaking events about truth, silence, and survival. One day, a young reporter asked me, "If you could go back, would you still open that phone? Would you still blow it all up?" I didn't even hesitate. I said yes. 100 times yes. She asked, "Even knowing what it would cost?" I smiled. I said, "Because the price of silence is always higher." I left that interview and took the long way home. The city buzzed around me, full of strangers and stories, full of beginnings and endings, and I realized something else. I didn't need to go back to the past to prove anything anymore. Because I had already walked forward, farther than I ever thought possible. I had built a life on ashes, and it grew. And in the quiet of my apartment, with the sun dipping low, I sat at my desk, opened a notebook, and wrote my last line. He lied. He cheated. He tried to bury me. But I told the truth. And the truth carried me farther than he ever could.